excited to have Hiten Shah come speak today. It took us a year to schedule him. Funny story, when I emailed him last year, he said I can only schedule 7 days out. So anything further than that won't work for me. So I emailed him a year out, and he finally accepted the invitation, which is fantastic. He also says that it's a good thing that he's coming this year and not last year, because the talk would have been completely different, and obviously this year is more relevant. So I can tell you a lot about Hiten, but he basically started building SaaS companies in 2005, has an excellent blog about SaaS growth. Insider tip, we read a lot of the blog while we were at Dropbox speaking about SaaS growth. And along the way has invested in, I believe, over 150 companies or advised them, and started multiple SaaS companies, so has a bit of experience on what's worked, what's failed, and I will let him take it from here.
Thank you. I used to come and do these kind of talks a lot, and then I also, when we got connected, I was in a phase of like not wanting to do that as much, not for any particular reason, except I call it external and internal. So I spent a lot of time externally for many years, and in about the last 18 months, I've spent more time internally around my products, my teams, my businesses, all kinds of other stuff like that. So that's the context, in case you think that like I'm private, prissy, or whatever word you want to use. That's not the case. Although, like, we'll see. So I'm going to jump right in. There's a lot of context I can give you. I know some of you folks want me to talk about SaaS and growth. So if there's anything you want me to talk about after I'm done, feel free to ask. If you really want to interrupt me while I'm talking, I don't really care. That's totally cool. If I cuss and offend you, I'm sorry. I haven't started the cussing yet. It might start at some point. And I'm definitely supposed to scare Ruchi, so like that's part of the game. And I'm going to start now, first of all, because she said I should scare her. So I've been looking into a bunch of stuff. This is an alien skull that's going to hang out with us. Make sure it's staring at somebody. So, okay, there's a long story there. I'm not going to share it. Okay, so in the last year, actually about, I'd say now 15 months, so about January of last year, a new business partner of mine. I have two main business partners on multiple different things. I'm a very complicated person when it comes down to like how my business is run and how I do things. So I'm going to try to boil it down to something much more simpler that's actionable for all of you around a lot of this stuff. So we started an experiment in January. This is Marie and I. And are any of you on the product habits list at all? Anybody here? Okay, cool. Please go sign up. It's all value, I promise. And a lot of the talk is from things we've done and lessons we've learned along the way. Some of it's been shared a little bit, but I haven't shared a lot because I've been speaking a lot. And what the experiment we started to run was basically, if we do things, when we do things, let's go share them with people and teach them how to do those things too. I know it's a simple concept. It might sound familiar to you from other places, but that's kind of where it's at. One anecdote before I continue that I'll share is, when Dropbox came up with their referral program, I was in the room giving them feedback on copy and stuff like that. So didn't get anything for it, don't want anything, except I have 3 terabytes of Dropbox right now. But that was for a different reason, because I helped Drew get a domain. Because someone gave it to me, and I was like, oh, you need this domain. It's like Dropbox without the O, you should have it, right? Anyway, fun story. So I am OG SaaS, if you want to call it that, although I've invested in a bunch of consumer products. And today, one thing I'll start off by saying is that most of my inspiration comes from consumer products at this point, not from B2B SaaS products, because I think most of them do an awful job of creating great experiences for their customers, and now it's more important than ever. So let's have some fun. I promise it's really time to have some fun. This doesn't exist, but it's kind of funny. Right. So I'm going to talk about the 7 deadly product habits. The reason I'm going to talk about that, to give even more context, by the way, there's 106 slides, and is because I believe that the thing that impacts growth the most is essentially your product strategy, not even your product itself, and how you think about the market and the opportunity. And I'll talk more about why I think that as we go along, but like I said, I know a lot of you have that lens on SaaS and growth, and so I want to make sure that I add some of that flavor into the talk and you actually understand what I'm saying. Because a lot of people would say that distribution matters more than anything else, marketing matters more than anything else. The reason I mentioned the referral program from Dropbox is they're huge because of that. Their product strategy, though, is why they probably are going to have a hard time scaling from where they are today to where they want to go. I'm talking about reading the founder letter that I read when they went public a few days ago and matching that to the business and product they have today and looking at their S1 and saying, okay, they have this aspirational vision, which is amazing and great and a little geeky in some parts when they talk about certain things. And they need to go from where they are to get there. And product strategy is what ends up most likely being the number one way that they get there. Sure, they need a better enterprise sales team, and you guys can all argue about all these other things, but at the end of the day, if that product doesn't fit in the market and those customers that they're going after don't care about it, it doesn't work. One of the reasons for that is because in their founder letter, they talk a lot about becoming sort of the hub and the fact that all your shit's everywhere, and like, you know, and the funny thing is a lot of companies are going after that right now, and it's in a lot of ways at the higher end of the market, they're doing a better job than Dropbox. But it's not because of the product. In those cases, it's actually because of sales, marketing, enterprise chops, and things like that. Dropbox's lens has always been a very specific lens around the world, or in the world, and I think that the product strategy that they start using or don't start using will really determine what happens next. Anyway, that's my little rant on that, and these sins are supposed to help you understand kind of how I think about the world and all this stuff. So I did this really badly once that I'll admit right now, probably 100 times that I won't admit. So we had this business, podcasting is pretty big now. It was called Fruitcast, and it was in 2005 that we created this business. And we spent 2 months and 45 grand, that's great. And what we learned is something that we should have learned before we even started the business, which is that the CPMs we were charging on this podcast advertising network was much higher than what even radio stations charge for their ads. That just doesn't work. We were fucked before we started, and this is the kind of thing that I dealt with over and over again, like 100 times, which is making stupid mistakes. Thankfully, this was one from a long time ago. I still make very stupid mistakes, but this is a partner we had at the business saying that he was waiting for some magic or something like that would jumpstart that business. That wasn't going to happen. But again, we were, I think, the first podcast advertising network, but it doesn't matter. So when I hear the word podcast, it makes me cringe, although I have one. So the way you offset that, you start with research. I know you can say, oh, customer research, talking to your customers, all that shit, super hot right now. Yeah, cool. It's still important. So one way we do that super early on, and we did that in the last year, is we emailed a list, the product habits list, the one I want all of you to sign up for. And in 6 weeks, we did 2 surveys, got 1,500 responses, had 52 customer interviews, and priceless learnings. So what we actually did was we didn't waste 6 months building anything. And I know some of this stuff you've heard over and over again. I'm going to go into some nice details, and those links that you saw, I'll send the deck over to you. The links that you saw are to content I've written around how to do this. And I call it early access liftoff. It's not a beta. I have a rant on that, which is that if you call something beta, people are going to think it's buggy and that there's problems with it. If you call it early access, it's going to give a little bit of an exclusive bend. I know people are using this terminology more and more. It really comes from gaming and other worlds like that actually have early access programs because they wanted to get people excited and get them in early and test the game out, etc. So our learnings from that first survey were really about the challenges people had with documents. Super boring stuff, but we were working on a document product, which I'll talk about later, that we totally got all wrong. And it fell into 2 categories in terms of how people use documents today. So one thing is that because there's so many document tools out there and a bunch of other reasons, people have just pick up a new tool. Like Dropbox Paper came out. I'm picking out Dropbox because of you, but like, whatever, it's easy. But
doesn't
Dropbox
scare me.
yeah, it's cool. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's a good case study and a lot of stuff, though. So Dropbox Paper came out, and so now teams, especially in this area, are picking up Dropbox Paper on top of Google Docs, on top of Confluence, on top of Quip, on top of whatever, right? So there's no way a company can control that, to be honest. No matter what kind of company it is, it is impossible to control. And we learned that in these 52 interviews because we talked to companies that were super small, all the way to like companies with tens of thousands of people in them. And really, the concern is that like there's a lot of concerns, but like the companies that were small didn't actually have too many concerns, so they actually used more tools. So in that case, like we started getting very specific data about how many tools certain size companies start to actually use. So this was a pretty big learning, and this was about a year ago. I'm pretty sure the number's gone up by about 1 on a lot of these averages, considering, I don't know, all the different names of these different companies and some companies adding document creation tools and whatnot. And then once we hit a certain phase in terms of past 200, security concerns became a big deal. You might have more formal IT staff, and then the numbers started changing in terms of how many people or how many tools a company used.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So you're referring to this early access.
Yeah.
Was there and you're saying to use that as a substitute for beta, was there a product that you were offering?
No. No
This
problem.
was surveys
Uh-huh.
with no
And
product
these
at all.
3 will give you the full-on formula. Yeah, these 3 links right
This
here.
is
Yeah.
early access to what? Like, how do you frame it as early access?
It's early access to a product we're going to build in the document space. That's the way we framed it. When you,
I said early, but in the future.
Correct.
yeah,
Let's move on.
yeah. So when you look at these, you'll totally get full context on them. This is something I've done since literally 2005. And
Sure, I just
and-
want to understand what.
No, totally cool. I'm just saying I've done it that long that like your questions are great. This stuff answers them. The context I didn't add, which is it was just a survey, and it started with just a survey, and then we did a second one, and there'll be more detail on some of that stuff. So the second thing that I see people do is be a lone wolf, which is what I like to call it. This is when product and other teams are not in sync. I usually use this slide when I talk about product and engineering because they're rowing in 2 different directions. And then you end up with this. Anybody see this episode? Yeah, great. So nobody wants to end up with that. So how do you fix that problem? Making friends lets you get data. This is something that I don't hear enough people talk about, which is when you have friends inside your company, you get to get data from tools and teams outside of the one that you're on, whatever one it may be. And that can be super helpful. And specifically, like my lens is a product team, which I think early on in a company, most people should be working on product for a number of reasons. Again, I like saying shit that people can argue with, which is totally fun. So I went so far as last year when we're figuring this stuff out. The background on this is that like I love getting hourly estimates from engineers, and I wanted to create a process that allowed me to get that for my teams because I didn't have a formal process, but every time I went through the pain of convincing the team to do it, things got so much better in so many different ways. And every engineer, unless they've done it before with me, gives me a weird look about this. So I'm totally down with it. And there's an article about our technical research process, and it actually starts with what we call a technical research outline. And it really helps you identify these obstacles you're going to hit or that engineers are going to hit before they, while they're writing code. And it helps you figure that out before they write code. And again, it helps you make friends with other parts of the company. If you're on product, you make more friends with engineers.
What size of company are you referring to?
Every size.
Well, what if you're just a startup with 3 people?
This can be super helpful because you're still going to run into issues where an engineer starts working on something, they, in their head or verbally estimate that it's going to take, 2 days. How long does it take? Never had it take 2 days. Ever. So it's not to add so high of a barrier to getting stuff done at all. If you're all in the same room and you're 3 people and you don't need this, totally cool, I've done that. Eventually you hit a point where things break, even with 3 people, because you're just trying to get so much done and there's so much uncertainty. So the idea is there's some level of process, and I'll go more into it, but that's a great question about sort of what size. So now our teams are very small, by the way, for a whole bunch of reasons, mostly around efficiency, and we're a remote team and a bunch of other factors. And we do this at really small sizes on purpose, not to slow us down, but actually to speed us up in the right ways towards what customer needs are. Yeah, I think I kind of covered that. And so we call it the EAT framework, which the technical research outline is one piece of it. It's explore, adjust, and task. And explore is all about giving the team time to actually explore and research before starting the build. So that's where the technical research outline comes, where a product actually creates it. and then engineering, and it has a certain structure, and then engineering ends up taking the first pass at the second pass at looking at it, and then you go to adjustment, which is you realign based on what's in there. I've seen this happen within like 30 minutes, an hour, so it's not a process designed to slow you down. It's a process designed to unearth all these things that we end up catching once engineers start coding. And then task would be taking the objective look at, okay, what did we align on? What's this sort of technical research outline that we did? Engineering did research, so they should have full clarity on giving literally down to the hour. In our teams, we tend to get down to even 15-minute blocks of accurate estimates. And the reason we're looking for that isn't to micromanage, and I've got all kinds of content on like that kind of stuff if anyone's super interested. It's not to micromanage, it's to actually be able to go backwards and go back to a product pipeline and be able to say, okay, I can prioritize product development. Because oftentimes people in product have no clue how long something's actually going to take, even from a guesstimate standpoint, and they can be grossly wrong. Which means in your prioritization of what you build, when you build it, how you build it, is completely messed up. So I think I talked a bunch about this stuff, and again, you'll get this deck so you can check it out. But basically, the idea of this process is to create a discussion between product and engineering. That's the reason, because the discussions tend to not happen in a way that's productive towards making changes, hitting the right trade-offs, things like that. So once I've had this implemented in other companies, the ship dates actually start getting hit, which was the #1 problem most companies seem to have. And this is also incorporates, I should say, an actual real prioritization process that happens before you start tasking engineers with things, and it happens before you create a technical sort of research outline, as we call it. And the whole idea is that you're making the decisions together. So to Ruchi's point, like when you're a really small team with 3 people, you're actually doing a process like this. It just happens in the same room and all together or in Slack, but it's happening. Once you start adding more and more people, structure comes into place, whether you like it or not, and then things start breaking because you're not having the same conversations. So it's simply to put structure to these conversations. That's why I actually recommend companies do it earlier than later. So the next sort of deadly sin would be chase shiny objects. So everyone knows the Segway. Was something cool in theory. I don't know how many years later it is now, but like the biggest use case is probably security and security guards moving around. We see them all around, or like tourism or fun stuff like this. So let's not build things like this. And products and features or shiny objects become hard to sell. High churn, low retention, repeat usage is lacking. When I talk about this, I also mean consumer products. So all this content is also meant for consumer products, not just B2B. So the opposite of that is knowing what's important. So this was really cool, and something that even I think, I usually push for super fast stuff, but this was something that we did super fast that we didn't think we could in the beginning. So we wanted to find the fastest path to critical learning. So we did all that research, figured out a big problem in the document space, and realized that if we were to get it right, there's a certain aspect of it we needed to get right. Today, we're further along than this, obviously. And so what we're building is a tool to help you basically search and organize all your documents in one place. So that's the concept. And we were able to build that MVP in 5 days. And so, but we also had a lot of things to cut down. So we asked if there's a faster way for every single feature that we had in mind in the MVP. That actually helped us cut out a lot of things because some of them didn't have a faster way. The ones that did have a faster way, we were even surprised by in terms of like how fast we could build some of those with a ton of trade-offs on the experience on purpose. And what we were able to do, because we got this in people's hands, and I'll tell you what we got in people's hands. It's basically a product where we connected with G Suite, which is Google Docs, spreadsheet, all that stuff, and Dropbox, and let you search across both those products. And then we also implemented Box and OneDrive and a bunch of those products. What we did though is literally we were querying those APIs in real time once you typed in a keyword. So this is why we were able to build it in 5 days. You could think of all the issues with search, indexing, fuzzy logic, all kinds of fun stuff. But because we had the conversations, our engineers were able to figure out, okay, we can do this in 5 days or less. We can literally, they built it in 3 actually. We found internal usability issues. It took about a day to fix them. There's more user experience stuff. And then we just got 10 people to use it. and we call it 10 people, 10x the learnings. And we went deep with them, which actually helped us create a search listing experience, like just the list. It's the listing itself of how the search result looks when you like see the search result, because it's a combined search across all these tools. And we were able to nail that in 5 days, because we identified that the biggest risk in creating a product that lets you search across all your tools is your ability to find the right shit. So we were willing to say, okay, we can't index everything. We're not going to have the perfect number of results. We might not even let you find that exact document you're looking for because it's not a thorough product. But all we're trying to nail is that when you look at these results, they make sense to you, and you're able to at least look and find what you're looking for. We identified that as the biggest risk, and that was all through kind of this process and these discussions. So that's kind of the example I like to give, because it's recent, and it's something that I didn't think was possible, because when we looked at all the APIs and the amount of work when you tell someone you want to search through all their shit, or when you tell an engineer we're going to search through everyone's shit, they're like, oh. And I mean, all of you can probably imagine how your minds would explode. But like I said, we were creating the APIs in real time, and we're just dealing with whatever we got and pasting it on the page. And we really wanted to focus on the user experience and the design of it, not the tech side of it, because that was already going to take a while, clearly. So another mistake people make is they ignore their competitors. I just love showing these quotes because like these really awesome people are basically telling you to ignore your competitors. More people, this dude too, and I like the truth, and yeah, you'll see. So I think the truth for me is like always know the alternatives to your product and your business as a whole, and that's really the key. And to me, an alternative, just to give a little more context, is any way that someone would solve the problem you're trying to solve for them, regardless of what way it is. So the classic example is if you have a to-do list app and you're targeting small businesses, the coffee shop in the corner, whatever, they use a clipboard with a bunch of paper. That's a competitor, and that's a type of competitor. You can call it an alternative that's not tech, right? That's super important, because you can learn a lot just by obviously observing how they use their sort of list, if that's your sort of target market. So I really think it's your downfall, and I've written a bunch about how to do competitor analysis. And this isn't about copying them. This isn't about chasing them. This is about identifying where they're strong, where they're weak, and from the customer's eyes. So nothing I'm saying is about ripping them or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this has changed.
There's more competitors than ever, and customers and users have way more options than ever. It's simple as that, right? So software is easier to build. Thank you, AWS. Honestly, like, thank you very much. We were one of the early users of S3 and even the queuing service.
You don't think tech companies in the 80s like had cutthroat competition?
Not in the same way we do today. The fact that we can build an MVP of something in 5 days and it worked and get it in people's hands should kind of show that, and seemingly a hard problem, right, that people would say. So yeah, it's just competition's everywhere. I haven't seen a market without it, and people popping up, even things that you might assume are hard. So back then, I think competitors, you had businesses that were lacking on product in other areas, and they could still compete in the market because there wasn't as much noise. So the truth is, it isn't the fact that there's so many competitors. That's the fact. It's the fact that your customers are sitting there having to look at review sites and Google around to find options. And they are going to do that, right? So if you're not the best for them, they're not going to find you. That's
Sure.
kind of the logic there.
I just think that's how it has always been.
Because I started in SaaS in 05, I can tell you definitively that is not how it's always been. It was so fucking easy to put something out there and get 30% retention week over week. Right now, you're lucky if you get anywhere near that off of something you just put out there. Right? And I'm seeing this in the numbers across the board. I'm seeing declines in retention rates on apps that you thought were sticky when they're stale and they don't innovate, or they let certain pockets of their user base go away because they're power users and all these kind of things. So it was a different type of competition. I think the competition in those days, it was just harder to build stuff. At Crazy Egg, we had racks of servers. So that was the kind of issue, and now we don't need to do that.
What is the original rationale between ignoring competitors? Just to let us know.
I would say that, I don't know, they said the quotes, right? But I think before it was like, you're chasing somebody else then, right? And you're not focused on your customer. What I'm saying is the lens of your the impression your customer has about competitors shapes what they think about the market now more than ever. So that's kind of the logic.
I think because that is don't get distracted by competitors.
Yeah.
Like make your own analysis of what your customers think.
Well, one is that's the surefire way to not be original, is you're always looking at your customers or competitors. Then you're going to be spending time obsessing over them, so you're going to be distracted. That was just I feel like there's a kernel of wisdom in what they were saying.
I'm not knocking them. It's just like if you go listen to them and you just completely ignore your competitors, you're not going to pay attention to your customer in a way that you should. You're not going to have a perspective about your customer. It's that simple for me, right? It goes back to the fact that like I'm very research heavy on this stuff, and I like to start with the customer and start by knowing what their problem actually is before I go build some things. Because I built too many things that nobody cared about. Like it's more my own bias, but that's my bias, right? So what we did is we did Net Promoter Score surveys on 6 companies. And it was Google Docs, Sheets, Dropbox Paper had just come out, that's what I was saying, and Confluence and Microsoft Word, and these are the scores that we got. And we also looked at review sites and got a whole bunch of gold there based on the ratings. I am going to go back to this one though, because this was what I would call first party data. It's data we got ourselves, right? And what we did is, in Net Promoter Score, I'm sure all of you know it's like a 0 to 10 score. The most valuable insights we got were actually when we asked people what was the most important reason they chose the score. And that told us why people hate Microsoft Word. That also gave us, even though we weren't building Dropbox Paper, a perfect roadmap on what Dropbox Paper would need to do in order to get more people happier with their product. And then when we had a lens of these other products, we also knew why people love Google Docs so much, right? So, and this is 775 responses. These companies that I'm talking about, all of them have way more customers. And when I look at what their roadmaps look like or what they've introduced and added in their businesses compared to what we learned off of not enough data, you would say, it's like night and day difference. So even looking at the review sites, I could tell that these companies aren't really looking at some of this stuff, right? I'm being critical because like, it's true, like look at the initiatives they have internally and look at what the customers are saying. And if that doesn't match up, you have a problem at the end of the day. So I wanted to give this example because I'm sure many of you have heard of one of my companies. So it's called Kissmetrics. We were essentially the first analytics to add people to analytics and a bunch of other stuff, but I'm going to talk about that a bunch. So funnels looked top to bottom when we started, and this was a Google Analytics funnel. This was actually an email I sent to somebody telling them how we were differentiated in somewhat technical terms. And it was we track people, we let you pass in events, and then retroactively create funnels and stuff, and we're very focused on companies that are monetizing. So the number 1 and number 2 didn't exist before us. You can go look it up, I'll show you too. People weren't able to track users. So when you had an email address and then you actually signed up for a product, you weren't joined together in these analytics tools. Even today, you look at Kissmetrics, it does a better job of that on a very technical level than other products, and it's very accurate. Not that that matters, because everyone else has the same value prop, and it's not as important because it's the norm in the market. And then the retroactive funnels, before we existed, you couldn't do that. You couldn't pass in random events and then go create your funnels on the fly. We built something in 30 days, not 5 this time, and this was way before. And so the infrastructure that was built back then, believe it or not, they're still dealing with it over there right now. I don't work on that business anymore. And it took 7 servers for just 30 customers. So we really went M in the MVP in terms of the infrastructure. This API also didn't exist before we came around, the one that tells you people, event, properties, and a timestamp, which I didn't include in here. The timestamp helps you pass in historical data. Think about how many analytics tools don't let you pass in old data into the system. Well, you can't pass in old data unless it's tied to something reasonable or something that you can identify a user with. So that was one of the big game changers. We invented a live debugging tool because before that, real-time was more like Dig Spy and Dig.com oriented consumer products type things that had real-time views. So we created this. Our first version actually didn't look like this. It was specifically meant for debugging, so it looked like a terminal. It was all black and had rainbow colors basically, and you saw all the events coming in. But that wasn't going to last because non-engineers really loved it and wanted to use it. This was because we couldn't make our core system real-time at the time. Because when you're doing person-based tracking, real-time data, and want to do sort of reporting on the fly, it's a triad of things that even today, the analytics companies that are much larger than Kissmetrics now that took a lot of these principles to town still can't do very well. We invented this better funnel that was left to right. And there's a very specific reason for that, because then we could show, here is a very early version of it, but you could show data below it. The new version, the updated version from that was even better and is kind of imitated everywhere. So this was a very, these were public tweets that were not solicited. And they were just people saying, there was tons of people saying that the thing that we got right was the right thing for them and the right thing for the market. So again, funnels were top to bottom. These are all the things I'm going to show are funnels that were after us. So this is an old mixed panel funnel. And after we invented them, everyone had them. So this was ours that got a little refined. So you can see that if you wanted to do segmentation, you could do it right below those bars, right? I'm sure it looks familiar to you, but you're probably not using Kissmetrics for it. So this was Mixed Panel's copy of it, I believe. I think this was another version of their copy. I think this was old Amplitude, if I'm not mistaken. This was some other one in some other tool. And this was finally Google Analytics caught on and said, okay, left to right is how people read. So you should probably make your funnels left to right, not top to bottom, because that makes them too complicated when you put a lot of data. So this is kind of the lesson there that still hurts me today. It'll hurt me for the rest of my life, which is if it's good for the customers, it'll get imitated and it'll become the norm. And that's a good thing. We can look at Apple for that example, not even my stuff, on how things become the norm if it's good for the customers. All the stuff I shared so far is all about how do you find that thing that's good for the customer. You research, you look at competitors, you go pretty deep if you want to find that right thing. This one's pretty simple, but it's keeping everyone in the dark. So this is my slide of that. I only have 2 slides on this part of it, but I think a lot of us can fall to this, even on our own teams, keeping people in the dark. I think it's, depending on your culture, even keeping customers in the dark can be bad for you if you need to show momentum and traction. It looks kind of like this, where like there are people on your team that are driving blind, basically, when you keep them in the dark about what the plans are and what you're doing. So sharing is caring. That's sort of my deal on that. What I really like is like when you're able to give your team context, especially if you're on a product team or in a really small team, about learnings that you're having and why you're doing the things you're doing. Things really change dramatically when engineers get closer to the customer. Some companies will even have engineers talk to the customers. Totally cool. For us, we've found it most effective to give them a lot of context about why we want to make changes the way we want to make them and how the interface solves for customer problems. Sharing interview results is something we commonly do with everybody on the team and really focused on what's the core problem people have. So when you do product research and start doing stuff, you'll notice that there are a lot of problems that customers will talk about, but when you share it with your sort of engineers and the rest of your team, you want to focus on the core problems. Iteration becomes super fast. This example that I'm going to give was from that MVP that we had. We had 5 days, and then we didn't spend more than about 2 weeks on that MVP to iterate it. And literally we were having, I know this is common, we were having daily pushes, but the daily pushes were actually engineers coming up with solutions much faster than we were coming up with solutions to sort of a lot of the problems. So that short feedback cycle really helps a ton. So another one that I'm sort of victim to a lot, hopefully not anymore, probably, just assuming I'm right, you know, the smartest person in the room syndrome, things like that. It's been very humbling to kind of come to this conclusion. I think this idea that visionary product development will only take you so far is sort of something to think about, mainly because I think what I've found is that founders, entrepreneurs, people working on product teams, engineering even, tend to have this mentality of they're either explorer or pirate. I came up with this analogy after thinking a lot about one of my competitors at Kissmetrics Mixed Panel. We had a bunch of existential crisis, like a class action lawsuit and a bunch of stuff that really made it so we couldn't raise money for a few years because we had to deal with that. But outside of that, they were a company that was very good at copying our stuff. And we were very good at being explorers and finding the new right things to create. For a short period of time, we were very good at that. I would say about 2 years. And they were always focused on chasing us. And then they chased a company called Flurry, and then they chased another company, and then they chased 5 different companies at the same time. And if you use their product right now, I'm sorry, but it's a product made of that mentality. No offense to them, they've built a much more successful business than we were able to at Kissmetrics. It's just like knowing, my friend calls it know thyself. So know where you are on the spectrum and like what your approach should be, because I've definitely been of the explorer mindset, although I've had to learn how to be more of a pirate after some hard lessons from mean people. Okay, so I think another one is like, believing you're right all the time is sort of not the right way to approach things. So I've spent more time believing I'm wrong about more things. And there's a secret to that one. We launched a product in October of last year called DraftSend, and it was totally wrong for a bunch of reasons. And it doesn't really solve the most painful problems people have with documents. It looked like this early on, some crappy site. It looks kind of like this right now. I have another secret. We're probably going to shut it down at some point soon. But remember that early access liftoff stuff? Well, it was actually meant for that product DraftSend. But because we wanted to do more research, we realized how wrong we were about that product we wanted to build. We launched it for a whole bunch of other reasons at the end of the day, knowing that we might shut it down. And because we did more research, we found the number one problem in the document space, which is finding your documents and organizing them across all the different tools you use, not adding audio to your documents, which is what DraftSend does. It's actually a pretty cool product. You should check it out, but it's not the most important problem people have in this space, and we want to work on the most important problem people have. Again, this was the MVP we built. Okay, so last one. So I used to think chaos rules, and I think people like Reid Hoffman kind of helped convince me of that. Like when he says, like, the journey starts with jumping off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. Again, it's totally right for a bunch of reasons, but I think that the devil's in the details of how you take that quote and kind of implement it. This implies a lot of chaos, though. And what I really believe in a lot more right now is this idea of rinsing and repeating. And that's why even in the early days of a company, I tend to probably implement slightly painful process in a few areas, mostly around product rigor, competitive analysis. And product rigor just means like being honest with yourself about what you're building versus thinking too optimistically about what you're building. And then the other part is engineering, because I love driving engineers crazy. If you haven't figured that out, by asking for 15-minute blocks of the estimate and making them accountable. So these are all the deadly sins, and these are all the opposites of that. This is what I really believe right now, and what I found to be useful if I dig really into like where I've been successful, and also people I know and companies that I see are successful, is when we're really digging into customers and really focusing on them and engaging them early and often, almost painfully in a lot of ways. So this is another thing I really believe. It's from the IBM CEO, and she says, you've got to keep reinventing. You'll have new competitors. You'll have new customers all around you. So one of the biggest mistakes I've made in a bunch of my businesses that actually worked is that if we, like at Kissmetrics, we figured out a bunch of stuff that's now the norm in the market. We should have built our team and our processes around being able to do that faster than anyone else. Because we're good at that. Like I'm good at that. I have a lens on being an explorer, so then you should design your team around that. While as a contrast, Mixpanel had a lens of being a pirate, and they actually were more successful than us. One main reason is they designed their team around that. So if you tried to tell them to go hunt down a new opportunity that's innovative, they always failed at that. But if you told them to copy something better than somebody else, seemingly, they were better at that, because they had a starting point and they built their teams around that. A lot of this has to do with your own psychology and perspective on the world, right, and how you think about it. So it's just a nice little motto: work on things that matter, make those things better, just be happier. So I have time. All of you have time. I know I went way over than probably what you thought, but by about 9 minutes. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. If I didn't cover enough SaaS and growth stuff, bring it on. So I got, and yes, I talk fast sometimes. Yeah.
How did you segment your customers for initial survey? What was your process?
I usually, if I don't have a hypothesis about the market, I'll start wider. So we started wider and asked segmentation questions in our service. So we asked them company size, title, and things like that, and we were able to get a lot of info. These days, I might even just be happy with something like Clearbit if I have a little bit of cash to spend on their API calls, and get someone's email and then use that data to backfill the segmentation, which if you're an engineer or you have that kind of like mentality, that's probably a better way, but you'll have about a 30 to 50% hit rate, so you have to be willing to take that hit. Usually I'll just ask the question, because if people are in the survey flow, especially if you design it decently, they'll go through it. We're not asking annoying questions. We're asking very specific questions.
My question was more around like diversification of your survey because if
Yeah.
it's a statistical method, right? You have to
Oh, sure.
diversify.
Yeah. My pithy answer is some data is better than no data. Like my more involved answer would be even with 30 responses after doing, I don't even know how many surveys I've done or help other people do, I find patterns, right? And so that's like a lightweight survey. But then really it's like getting those people to opt in and want to talk to you and then going really deep. So our 52 interviews, you could say it's not statistically significant. Those interviews were almost, I would say, they were done 9 to 10 months ago. We're still going back to them. And we're like pretty deep into the product and what we're building. And the amount of insights we're getting from them right now, even is the shelf life. I am amazed at the shelf life of that information because of the way our process and the way we ask them. So there's just 52 interviews, but it's still paying in spades in terms of the problem that we're looking to solve. Yeah, sure.
After your like first 4 or 5, let's say for a SaaS product, after your first 4 or 5 customers,
Yeah.
how do you grow from there? Because I mean, like let's say you've exhausted your friends and family pipeline,
Sure.
and you have about like 5 customers who are using it. How do you move beyond that?
So I take an approach of doing the early access process, which already gives me a list of people who are willing to talk to me and use the early product. So I actually don't like going after 4 or 5 customers early on. Enterprise is a little bit different, but I'm talking about a little bit higher velocity, so mid-market and below. When you target in SaaS, I wouldn't be in a situation where I have 4 or 5 customers through friends and family. I'd already start learning about how I'm going to have to market to these customers. And so the early access surveying, by having one and having a goal of having 100 responses to it, helps me understand how I'm going to get more customers before I have the problem of 4 or 5 customers and having to do that. Now, if someone's in that boat of 4 or 5 customers and having to spread out, then you essentially have to figure out how the product itself will grow, if you can, grow itself and spread, or basically start doing actual marketing, right?
So
and whether it's ads or social or outbound sales or whatever works based on your budget and things like that.
So what are the top, I guess 3 or 4 different strategies around figuring out how your product grows?
Yeah, for me in B2B SaaS, again, I want to first start with like your question, which is like, I would go outbound sooner than later, which is basically outbound means learn outbound sales and the equivalent of what a sales development rep would do. And if you're a founder, just learn that yourself. And that includes like emailing other startups to use your product, if that's your market or if that's going to get you feedback. Like, I was surprised, honestly, at how well Suhail at Mixpanel did, how great of a job he did emailing random startups to use Mixpanel. We never did that. We had lists and we had a different process, but I was amazed at how many people would email me about him talking shit in an email about us, but it's a different story. That's just his perspective. So in terms of the top strategies, for me, number 1 is start early, is the number 1 strategy I'd say, and have an early access before your product's ready, and actually get learnings from customers and use that for your early sort of customer list. And use that to learn how, even ask them questions like, how do you discover products like this? Or when's the last time you bought a product like this and how'd you find it? Because that's super useful in understanding, at least with your target customer, how they do things. Another strategy I would use would be, if you have some customers, getting really good at getting them, even from a sales process, not just referral, but like actually getting them to tell you who else would be valuable, who else could use your product. I found that to be way more valuable than almost anything else when you're really early, and convincing them to have those people actually sign up for your product. I know it sounds weird, but like word of mouth is still the number 1 way products spread. So if you can ask somebody that, as long as they're happy with your product, even if you don't productize or anything, it works really well. If you have an opportunity to do sort of like a product where the product itself creates an asset that needs to be shared outside the company for whatever reason, and it's surprising how many times when I brainstorm with founders in SaaS, that exact question, which is how can we create something in our product that's shared outside the company, in an hour, how many ideas we can come up with that are worthy of testing or even trying, regardless of what kind of product it is.
What does that mean?
So that means like if you're, the most basic example would be if you're a billing system and that's your product, then the idea of invoices from your customers to their customers, right? Like that's a basic idea, but that idea could start with the question of like, how do we get an asset created? What kind of assets in our product are our customers creating that can be shared outside of their account, right? And again, you can come up with really wild things that are actually really effective. So to me, the product brainstorming around how can our product be shared outside of these people's companies is a key question I would ask. It's probably like from a product standpoint, one of the top ones that takes some time to think through, but like is really valuable. There was someone over there.
When you've built out your teams, what are the best ways you've found to identify employees who hit all those positive attributes on the previous slide?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm actually one to not necessarily worry so much about things that other folks might like reference checks and things like that. So I would say that some people will say that go ask a manager of theirs or old manager of theirs how they acted in certain situations, which is great. I usually do that only if I think the candidate and the person I'm looking to hire is worth digging in that deep, because usually there's a problem with something they're saying and I'm not sure, like I'm on the fence or the team's on the fence. So to me, my best example would be make them do some work and give them an assignment. In fact, like my strategy for hiring most of the time is having an assignment and making that assignment designed to solve those problems based on the role that you're hiring for. So solve those problems meaning assess, like can they learn fast? Are they actually able to think holistically, be unbiased about things? And the way you design that assignment should be oriented around figuring out how they think about sort of the work they're doing. So an assignment could be like, okay, this is our product, we're thinking about adding feature X. Write a 2-pager on how you'd approach that. So I like making it short and open-ended, because, especially in a product role, because you're looking for people that are going to dive in pretty deep and you want to understand how they think. That's really what you're going for, which is you want to understand how they think. And then obviously that has to match with your culture, right? So these habits, some people are into, right? The bad habits, and that's part of their culture. So I might even start more holistically and say, okay, these are the habits, culturally, which ones are hardest for us and which ones come naturally, right? And then see if you need to augment, right? Because I've looked at many companies and I can even point out some of the large companies and how some of these habits they're consistently operating around the bad habits, just because this is my opinion of habits, right? Or myself and my co-founder, and it is from learnings, but I don't want to be that prescriptive, right? I think they're great, but use them as you will. Yeah.
How do you approach pricing your SaaS tools?
That's funny you asked. So right now, I'm going through research on pricing on the Product Habits newsletter. You're going to catch the tail end of it because there's 2 more that we're doing. We haven't put blog posts out about it, but I would go read a company called Price Intelligently's blog, and you'll learn everything you need to. Like we have the advantage of having the founder there, Patrick, as a friend, and he's helping us go through this. And the stuff we've been sharing, he actually hasn't shared yet, but if you email me, I'll send you the links to the emails and stuff like that. But like, it's a good question right now. I would say that the biggest thing I would say is it is super fucking easy to figure out your pricing and your packaging before you even build the damn product. Nobody wants to believe me on that, but like I can prove it through the research we've been doing. We haven't built the product fully out, and we know exactly what features we need to add and how much people are going to pay for them, and how important a few features are compared to all the other ones. So you can do this. People just don't spend the time or don't know any better, but like if you think about like brands like Coke and CPG, they do this all the time, right? When you see hit flavors of Coke or whatever, and when you see flops, the difference between how much research did they do and how well did they do it. Same with like software is a lot easier in a lot of ways compared to that. So I would say that even pricing can be done like that, and companies have been doing it for years. The cell companies that have had subscription businesses forever, well, they know how to do that, right? They know how to do yield management and everything. They even know how to do pricing research as they have to make changes. Because remember, you used to pay for voice and text, right? Now you pay for data. Cool.
Would you, sorry, is that, I can ask a question. Would you default to pricing higher than you're comfortable with, or lower?
If you want less tire kickers, you price higher. If you want more volume for whatever reason, you price lower. But that means you're probably going to have more churn. So what I've noticed is, and again, this is based on, let's say, I'm starting with, let's say you did some research and you have an idea of the band of your price points, then I would apply what I said, which is like, in general, once you know some kind of band of your market, and you could even just do this by looking at the competitors of your market, looking at the high end and the low end of the competitors. If you price lower, you're gonna have higher churn. That's like a fact in SaaS and B2B today. If you price higher, you're gonna have lower churn. Again, if you price lower, you're gonna have higher churn. If you price higher, you're gonna have lower churn. It's been every data point I've seen plays out like that.
And do you have any tips for reducing churn in SaaS?
My pithy answer, this is why I look at consumer products, is that they have to spend more effort retaining customers. So if you're able to get people engaged and retain them, and you build features towards that goal, your churn will be low. And this means like retain them in the first, like make sure that the retention's high in the first 7 days if you're just starting out and you have like some relative high velocity product. If you have a enterprise product or a higher end product, make sure the retention is relatively high or really high in the first quarter of someone's usage of the product. So people don't spend enough time. My criticism would be people don't spend enough time in the early usage and that early experience, not just onboarding, like the first time user experience, but the first period of time for the context of your product. That's why I mentioned enterprise at about a quarter, and sort of more higher velocity SMB at about 7 days, much more similar to consumer. That being said, gaming is all about, what is it, day one retention, which is important for gaming. And then you'd build features and product and things like that oriented around getting that kind of retention, hopefully without any tricks, because people don't like those anymore. Yeah?
One of today's mentioned was just communication plan and product strategy. What have you seen as the most effective ways to do that internally? And then
in terms of communicate with
team.
There's literally 5 different types of meetings that I think are super important. I'll try to list all of them out, but I think one of the most important meetings is the ones you have internally with your own product team around what I call a prioritization process. So this is before you task, how do you prioritize what you work on? There's a spreadsheet, and I usually put it in a spreadsheet, and we really weigh it against certain variables and factors, very much like you would weigh the impact, difficulty, and other things for an A/B test. We do that for every feature now, very much like an experimentation growth mindset. So that's the first sort of meeting, I would say, was weekly meetings around checking that and making sure you're doing that well, much like a growth team. I like to run product teams like a growth team. I don't see a better way right now, considering where the market is and everything like that. Maybe it'll change. The second thing I would say is product demos. So those are like outside the company, outside the product team, which even on a small team doesn't always happen. So like product demos meaning like we ship something, or before we ship something, let's show it off. Could be screenshots, could be anything. Another related one, which is different, would be like customer learnings meetings. So share the customer learnings with engineers. One that's sort of related to that as well would be like technical, the EAT method that I mentioned, or framework I mentioned in the technical research outlines. Having meetings with engineering once you've sort of thought through, we want to build this, here's a document, like let's go talk about it after you review it. And we have a section in there called open questions, where product has open questions. Engineering will answer them because they're for engineering, and then engineering will add their own open questions. And open questions are just like, they're open, like we don't have an answer to them, but we really need one, right? So there's this whole back and forth process around discussions. And then I really do believe things like offsites, hackathons, and things like that can be super useful. So I put that in another category, even on a really small team. So to get out of the kind of, switch people's mindset out of the day-to-day. And if people aren't on the product team or engineering team, they get to get involved in that kind of stuff, get their hands dirty. And the last one I'll say is customer demos. So some of the most amazing insights and speed and momentum for solving problems for customers has come from literally having a customer come into the office and show everyone where it's fucked, where the product experience is just totally fucked. The amount of energy engineers get out of fixing that problem is amazing. Like we had a problem we were trying to fix. It was basically marketing, not attribution, but proper marketing showing refers in analytics. Trust me, this is a problem. Even Google Analytics has a problem with it. Until it took a year, and I was like advocating it, so were some people on the product team. But until the engineers heard one single customer bitch us out about it and show us exactly what the pain was, we'd show the engineers that. Showed the customer, like, showed them videos of people struggling. But until that person was in the room and they had to literally have some kind of visible, maybe physical, energetic accountability to them, nothing got done. Literally overnight, this problem was solved, and like they figured out the stupid way to do it that like should have figured out earlier, right? So I think like it was amazing. It was actually at a company offsite that we did that. So that's why I'm a big fan of having the customer just sit there but really not focus on the good shit. Like, tell me what the fuck's wrong with it, and tell everyone in this room what's wrong with it. Like, let's have the whole company or whatever aspects of it hear it, and make sure that people that are not on the product team are there, because that's really key. Not salespeople though, because then they'll get scared like the product's fine. Probably is, right? You don't want them to think that. They already think that. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.